Tommy Robertson. 4 off, silly bitch. Who's that?
Hey baby, alright? Fucking hell, man.
Members of the press, just don't go past the bus stop, please. Thank you.
I can't. Tell your colleagues to calm down. Right. Thank you. Tell them to calm down.
You control them.
That's your job. Don't you dare say it's my job. How dare you? How dare you?
How are you, David? How are you?
What do you charge for this?
An email on chat.
Yeah? What, your YouTube?
Yeah, and a site. Just look at the site. On there.
Okay, alright, really. Thanks a
No
lot.
problem, mate.
Take care.
Keep safe, be lucky.
You too.
Smile and wave.
What channel is it?
You were in. They're running down Whitehall. Look. We're going to ask you to leave via this route. All right, we're cameraman. Gone the wrong way, mate. They've all circled round to get the. Are you Russian TV again? You're not Russian TV. You're the Russian TV guy. It's not you again. Brexit, mate. You've gone the wrong way.
David, go ahead. You. David, run ahead.
Listen to me.
Yeah, no, there's an officer.
Okay, right.
It's news. It's news.
I don't know.
It's news.
This officer is not very well. Okay.
News.
That's not.
It's news.
It's not.
With
Sorry,
respect.
it's news.
So, with respect, there's nothing newsworthy there. She's dehydrated. There's nothing newsworthy there.
Sorry, listen. It's news when we're not news protest.
People, please. That's not very well.
People want to know if we're not in the protest.
I'm just hungry recording.
Absolute quarters prevent disorder.
Guys, absolute corner dispersing into the tube. Absolute going into the tube.
This way a little bit. That's cool.
Yeah, look, that's
Boys. Should have got that.
if you touch them, it's like you're pushing that guy back. We'll go down there. We're going to have to go that way.
He's the second coming of Jesus.
Sorry. Obviously, I don't trial and error. I don't know where the borders are.
The second
Simon, run! In the front of this lot! Simon, all of them! Line up, leg!
Media were trying to say that that's why it's stopped them.
Biddy biddy.
So the only way I can get them back is to put them back.
The night of the Joke Community. Where's the bridge? I want to get you. I'm not EBN, I'm fucking Irish. EBN, you're not like Irish. Irish, you're not like EBN. I'm fucking Irish. So can I please get a true? Yes or no? Why? I'm Irish. I'm EBN, 82. Yeah, I'm fucking Irish. Yeah, go. Back up.
Guys, blocking the pavement. Need to move. Show's over.
all mandatory for us to do.
Give it 2 1-7 police and ask the skipper if it was 3-5-7. So when I spoke to you, they were back to their quarters. So whoever they are, they'll be back to their quarters. Yeah.
So you want to grab over fight Jesus? Why do you think I fight Jesus? He did a fucking one, he did a fucking one.
Yeah.
Nothing more than that. Why you want to fuck over there? So tell me, why don't you check? You want me to fuck over and do different things. If you want me to go over, I'm afraid I'm not fucking. Your friends fuck EDL, so I better go and knock you out. Fuck you. Well, you're saying to me, you can't fuck out of it, man. Before saying I ain't fucking fine. I want smack now. Never do smack now. I get arrested there. Why not?
We live in the country, and it's the fucking job. That one was the guy, I don't remember his name, the white house.
One hand. One hand. Okay, it's that guy. It's the guy. That is the life of the
Square. What they don't do is go towards Parliament Square, either down that lot, which is like do, or the road is, whatever that one is. So if you do the same little carriage across there, and make sure no one comes there. It doesn't need to be absolutely no time. People that go through, so we get a BLM group turn up, come across the bridge. So we have 2, 3 times. Yes.
Now, we in bus. The buses, we can stay on the buses, yeah? Happy? 2, 3, 5. Słyszeliście, ale puściłem w telewizji do góry. Bo przemawiać to jest telewizorem. They know.
Like, I've
already put down this. It's for the action, like EDO boys. Yeah, man. That's it, man. Just want to record something.
Three Molotovs. Put on Snapchat.
You're doing it for the gram.
That's it.
Really?
I'm doing it for fun.
Wait, can I get? I'm sorry, I'm just recording stuff for work.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're out here. Wait, hold on. Do it for my gram. Right? So what's? We just no. Get one of your three. Oh right. Oh, that's a shame. Get them off. Sorry.
People are so worried about their face broadcast.
You wear the British police, actually wear the law, a couple of guys, see the kettle.
Of course. Yeah.
I got caught up with
Definitely.
legal action. I think it's a little bit. My bad. You got the verification, so that shit's not easy. Yeah, it's what it is, you know. Yeah, you have a lovely day.
Wait, you go for that? Yeah, here is my earphones. Yeah. No earphones. Okay, so they might be inside the desk. I will have to pull it out. I told her let them in.
Sorry, can you go that way, mate?
I don't know why I'm not the
moved.
Anche lei ci sta come cominciate le scuole a qua.
Jay,
Oh my God, Georgia!
EGL guy out on his own battered into fuck. See it. They just they've gone. Yeah, they've gone back in front.
I've lost about a stone already.
Why are you trying to eat this shit? Well, you know what's going to happen. Why would you do that?
Hey Zoe.
Yeah, I'm you say, but yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, it's getting hard. They beat a couple of people off.
Protect the fascists! Please protect the fascists!
Oh, that's heavy. Oh, that's light.
Glad to see you're still alive, my friend. Glad to see you're still alive.
I know. Maybe just go down the rhythm. I don't know, yeah, we just
Yeah.
Patrick is that?
Yeah.
You get me?
everyone Saturday. Right, mate.
Station is.
Amendments Act 2020. Following the orders passed on Thursday, virtual participation in questions, urgent question statement is allowed for certain honourable members. I have reintroduced a complete call list for questions, and so honourable members should not rise to try and catch my eye. They should only rise when called. Where a substantive question is asked by an honourable member participating virtually, I will ask the Minister to answer the question and then call the honourable member to ask their supplementary. We now come to questions. Secretary of State for the Home Department. Come to number one, Sir Edward Dibb.
Number one, sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the government has made it our priority to protect the vulnerable through this national emergency, but we do not believe it necessary to suspend the NRPF condition to do so. It is right, Mr. Speaker, that migrants coming to the UK are financially independent. However, practical support such as rent protections and the coronavirus job retention scheme apply to those NRPF conditions, and we have allocated more than £3.2 billion to local authorities and £750 million to charities to support the most vulnerable.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary doesn't get it. People who've worked here, paid taxes here for years, are being denied support and are falling into destitution. People who've lost their jobs or seen their income slashed can be excluded from the very protections the Home Secretary cites. So, Mr. Speaker, given that this rule disproportionately impacts people in our black and minority ethnic communities the hardest, will the Home Secretary now suspend the no recourse to public funds rule for the duration of the pandemic?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question and his comments. The answer is no. Local authorities have provided a basic safety net, and that is through significant financial provisions introduced by the government and a range of measures to support those people that have been working. And because of coronavirus, because of this national health pandemic, the situation we find ourselves in, will support people with no recourse to public funds. And that assistance is being given under the coronavirus retention scheme and also the self-employed income support scheme. So these funds are available. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, it is wrong to imply that safety nets are not in place. Local authorities, and I hope he will pay tribute to local authorities, who throughout this pandemic and this crisis have been resourced to an extra £3.2 billion to provide vital financial help.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the 26th of March, further to the comments the Home Secretary has just made, MHCLG ministers wrote to all councils asking them to utilise alternative powers and funding to assist those with no recourse to public funds. So it would seem that the government has understood that NRPF is counterproductive during the pandemic in principle, but the lack of clarity from the Home Office on this in practice means that people are still facing destitution. With this in mind, will the Home Secretary look again at the spirit of the Prime Minister's comments to the Liaison Committee and outline how they intend to support those families?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to place on record that, of course, this isn't just the Home Office. We work across government and obviously MHCLG. The Department of Local Government and Communities are central to this. And in terms of the resources that have been provided, practical support such as rent protections and the coronavirus job retention scheme apply to those under the no recourse to public funds conditions, but also the Honourable Lady mentioned specifically MHCLG and local authorities, £3.2 billion, and I've been working directly with the Secretary of State for MHCLG, and in fact I've also been part of discussions with the devolved administrations as well throughout this whole period, throughout the last 10 weeks, looking at the protective measures and the support that can be provided through the resources provided from central government.
Joanna Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Black Lives Matter movement and Public Health England's COVID-19 outbreak review of disparities in risks and outcomes have highlighted the inequalities suffered by black and minority ethnic people in our society. Does the Home Secretary accept that the no recourse to public funds policy disproportionately affects people from BAME communities?
Yeah, exactly.
And if she does, why won't she push for it to be suspended as a concrete step towards tackling the inequalities which so appall many of our constituents?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of points that I'd like to make to the Honourable Lady. First of all, the government published its report last week into the impact of coronavirus on Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. The findings are indeed shocking, and it is right that the government invests its time and resources through the Equalities Minister in particular to look at the measures that can be brought in place. Now, this policy of no recourse to public funds is one of many policies, and it is right as a government that we look at all policies that affect all communities in the round without singling one particular policy out.
Glad to hear that the Home Secretary is looking at the policy, but I would urge her to read a report that came out this time last year by Agnes Woolley called The Cost of the No Recourse to Public Funds Policy. It found that most families with no recourse to public funds in the United Kingdom have at least one child who is British by birth, and nearly all of those families are Black and minority ethnic. Accordingly, no recourse to public funds is inherently more likely to affect BAME British children than white British children. So given this evidence that no recourse to public funds is a policy with racially discriminatory impacts, why won't she accept that it needs to go?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, I think it's wrong to characterise as a policy of racially discriminatory. It is a fact, however, if I may, it is a fact that for all communities and people of all backgrounds, there are many measures in place in terms of protections, financial through the safety net of the welfare state. In addition, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to children, also the funds that are being made available through the Department of Education in terms of pupil premium, there are a plethora of support packages that are combined collectively based upon the individual needs and individual circumstances. And it is right that we treat individuals, people as individuals, and not just categorise them. Now, I think it is important, Mr. Speaker, to recognise that there are a number of issues, there are a plethora of issues that affect people from Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities, but we cannot assume that there is a one-size-fits-all approach or a single policy solution to address those issues. And it is right, as I've already indicated, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend, the Minister for Equalities, looks at the report that was published last week, and the government provides a collective response to the many challenges facing the community.
I've withdrawn, so we go straight to Aaron Bell.
I'll do, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend for his question. My department is working extremely closely with the police and the fire and rescue services, as he will be aware, to ensure that they receive all the support that they need, PPE, throughout this COVID-19 outbreak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Home Secretary for her answer. Could I also take this opportunity to put on record my support for the police and my sympathies to those who have been injured in the police in the last few days. Also in Staffordshire, I believe the police have done a fantastic job throughout the COVID-19 outbreak. We've got one of the lowest quantities of fines in the country. That's because they've been policing with consent and with the good sense of the people of Newcastle-under-Lyme and the county more widely. But on the PPE point, it's my understanding from them that they are expecting to be reimbursed for the supplies that they have got. They have sufficient supplies. Could the Home Secretary confirm that this will be the case?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question? And of course, he represents a constituency that I'm familiar with as well. And the work of both his local resilience forum, his police chief constable and police officers and staff throughout the pandemic has been exemplary. It really has. And I want to put on the record my praise for them. With regards to PPE supplies, it is my understanding that the force have obviously achieved sufficient supplies. That is something we've been working with working on a national level. And the government has previously indicated that forces should be reimbursed for expenditure, and obviously we'll be working across government on that.
We now come to the next question from Bim Afolobi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 3.
Minister Malthouse.
Mr. Speaker, stealing someone's tools is a particularly rotten kind of crime. Not only does it deprive them of their belongings, which is bad enough, but it also often deprives them of their livelihood, notwithstanding the inconvenience it causes to them and to their employers. We're determined to do something about this, which is why I recently convened a group of people from the industry and policing to look at what more we can do to help. And we're spending £25 million on our Safer Streets Fund to drive down exactly this kind of acquisitive crime.
I thank the Minister for his response. Would he join me in championing the use of modern technology to combat tool theft?
like the Tool Watch app designed by Harpenden residents Denise and Alan Brett. This technology makes each tool traceable and can help police fight this crime. Would you take this opportunity to champion Tool Watch and help spread its usage throughout the police forces throughout the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is one of the most original thinkers in the House, and therefore it's no surprise that he champions innovation in all things, including crime fighting. So yes, he's absolutely right. There's lots more we can do harnessing technology to fight crime, and I'd be very interested when we get back to normal to go and visit his constituents and see Tool Watch for myself, so that we can take it and promote it to the industry more generally.
Sir John Hayes.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for that question. He, of course, has very long experience of matters such as this in the Home Office and elsewhere. On the 1st of January, for the first time in decades, the United Kingdom will have full democratic control over our immigration system, giving us power to determine who comes here and for how long. We do not intend to impose a cap, but our points-based system will make sure that only those with the skills our country needs come to the United Kingdom, and it is our expectation that total migration as a consequence will reduce.
John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, with the post-COVID economy facing unprecedented challenges and the prospect of job losses, in the same spirit that the Home Secretary showed in condemning this weekend's wicked violence, will the Minister look again at the resident labour market test, which means jobs have to be offered here before they can be filled from abroad? Rebuilding Britain means backing British workers, Mr. Speaker. Well, my right honourable friend is, of course, correct that we want to encourage as many people as we possibly can from the UK to take up job opportunities that are available. Our objective ultimately is to see a full rate of employment. We've laid out the points-based test that will apply from the 1st of January of next year, making sure that only people with high skills can come here. But of course, it is up to this House and this Parliament to keep that under review on an ongoing basis to make sure we are striking the right balance in the way that he's describing.
I'm grateful for all the Home Secretary is doing to bring in this new policy, which I hope brings higher wages and higher skills. But doesn't it also require tougher enforcement against the dreadful people traffickers who are making money out of making a mockery of our laws and undermining all that we stand for?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct. People trafficking and people smuggling is a shocking offence that causes untold human misery. Last year, immigration enforcement made, I think, 259 arrests in connection with people smuggling and secured 101 criminal convictions. But I would like to assure my right honourable friend this is an area where we can, must and will go a great deal further.
Caroline Nansen.
Question 10. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, domestic abuse is a horrific crime that shatters the lives of those affected. We are working closely with domestic abuse organisations, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the police to ensure that the help and support continues to be available, and more so while the COVID-19 restrictions apply as they currently do.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you, my right honourable friend, for her commitment to work in this area. 1 in 4 perpetrators are repeat offenders, as many as 6 different victims for others. In that light, does my right honourable friend agree with me that greater uptake of DRIVE, an intensive intervention programme aimed at perpetrators, could save lives, change the narrative and break the generational cycle which sees children raised in homes where they've witnessed abuse go on in later life to be at greater risk themselves of becoming either abuser or victim?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, and she has highlighted many of the challenges but also issues, but also the opportunities in terms of how we can work with partner organisations to provide the right kind of support that is needed to tackle the root causes of domestic abuse, and also to protect children but also educate them in terms of their own safeguarding. There are many opportunities through which this government is doing that right now so that we can ensure we tackle this heinous crime. The landmark domestic abuse bill, which began began its committee stage on the 4th of June. It's a significant opportunity to put this in order to transform our response to domestic abuse, but importantly, provide the support, the crucial and critical support to victims and bring the perpetrators to justice.
11 and 12 withdrawn. We now come to Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that following this session, there will be a statement on the events of the weekend, so I will address those matters then. On domestic abuse, which is the subject of this question, I would like to welcome the fact that the government responded to the calls of those on these benches and campaigning charities on the need for a funding package for the sector. Labour called for £75 million for domestic abuse services specifically, with specialist services such as those for migrant women protected. Can the Home Secretary confirm how much of this investment has reached the front line?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman will be well aware of the funding packages that the Home Office, along with MHCLG and the MOJ, put towards the Treasury recently. But what I can say, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the money that has reached the frontline support organisations who are running key services and vital services, including helplines, chat functions, and improving their own technological capabilities, so far, £1.2 million has been allocated to date to 13 organisations specifically for this COVID-19 response to help expand helplines, online capability, and of course provide the additional support guidance so that victims can continue to access the support that they need.
Nick Thomas.
Well, £1.2 million of support for helplines is obviously very welcome, but it's a tiny proportion of the overall £75 million, and that really does need to reach where it is needed as soon as possible. As of 2019, 1 in 6 refuges had closed since 2010, and local authority spending as a consequence of austerity had fallen from 31.2 million to 23.9 million in 2017, resulting in 60% of women being turned away from refuges for lack of spaces. Now, that simply isn't good enough. Can the Home Secretary, even if she doesn't know the specific figure today, go away and confirm that she will do all that she can to ensure that the money that's been announced actually reaches the front line? Yes, we do have the domestic abuse bill coming through Parliament, but we cannot legislate our way out of this alone. That money is needed now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right about the money that is required to go to frontline services, which is why, and he did ask of the £76 million, the amount of funding that has been allocated to domestic abuse. As I've indicated, it's split across 3 departments. The Ministry of Justice has itself received £15 million for the work with local domestic abuse charities through the criminal justice system. But his specific question was about the need for refuges, refuge provision, and obviously the Department for Local Government and Communities will be allocating £10 million to domestic abuse safe accommodation services. It is important that we all recognise that is where the demand is. Throughout this very difficult period, Mr. Speaker, where refugees have found it difficult to operate, there have been a widespread of measures that we as government, in our engagement with them, directly with the Commissioner as well for domestic abuse and the Victims Commissioner, have deliberately sought to find practical means and support for the front line, specifically to support them throughout this emergency.
Edward Tibbs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just building on my right honourable friend's answer to the question on refuges, something that COVID-19 has also highlighted is, despite the best efforts of the staff in our refuges across the country, including in the northwest, many of those who sought refuge there, including their children, in some circumstances, haven't had access always to a good internet connection, often a lifeline to them, and particularly for children who need education. As we start to roll out the broadband across the country to fulfil our manifesto commitment, will my right honourable friend commit to looking at refuges as one of those who should be at the front of the queue to make sure that this is something that people know will be there should they seek that sanctuary?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend makes a vital and very important point. I've seen for myself, actually, working with Refuge and other third-party organisations in the domestic abuse space, the amazing work that they do in terms of internet safety within refuges. And I think we must always put first and foremost the safety of the victims within the environments that they are living. But he's right to highlight that without the internet, too many, including children, are cut off, and obviously that has a hindrance to them in terms of their own development and their own well-being. I will absolutely take a suggestion away with me and ensure that as we build greater internet safety provisions in refuges for domestic abuse victims, we also think about what more can we do to give them the right kind of safeguards, but the right provision.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Number 16, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm very glad my honourable friend has raised this question. We should be... Oh, but I beg your pardon. Could I, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, group this with questions number 17 and 18? Very kind, Mr. Speaker. I do apologise for overlooking that. So I'm very glad this question has arisen. We should be absolutely clear that these crossings of the English Channel are extremely dangerous. They're crossing the busiest shipping lines in the world. They are facilitated by criminal gangs who are ruthlessly exploiting vulnerable people. And the crossings are entirely unnecessary because France is a safe country and France has a very well-established and functioning asylum system. We are therefore working around the clock with our French counterparts to stop these illegally facilitated crossings, sharing intelligence between the NCA here and the French authorities, and working with the French to prevent, on the beach, embarkations taking place on an around-the-clock basis.
Julian Lewis.
Well, that's a very clear answer as far as it goes, but it does appear to be the case that French patrol boats are escorting these dangerously overloaded inflatables across the channel until they reach English waters, whereupon, or I should say UK waters, whereupon our patrol boats pick up the occupants and ferry them to our shores. Now, I understand that this is because we have to save people who've put themselves and sometimes their families at serious risk at sea. But how can we remove perverse incentives to behave in such a dangerous fashion?
And, well, it's worth emphasising that where boats get into difficulties in French waters, for example, if their engine breaks down, then the French will pick them up and take them back to France. We must, of course, as the honourable gentleman says, be very mindful of safety at life, but we are at the moment reviewing our operational practices in these areas for the reasons he mentions. But let me say that half of the attempted crossings are intercepted by the French on the beach. We have so far, since last January, returned 155 people who have crossed, and we seek to return many more.
Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Migration policy is a core aspect of our national sovereignty. Could my right honourable friend please confirm that the UK will have a fair immigration policy which welcomes people who come to the UK legally, irrespective of nationality or religion, and that we take back control over illegal immigration?
Well, I entirely agree with the point my honourable friend makes, and indeed the similar points made by the member for Dover on this topic. We have a points-based system coming into force shortly. We granted asylum or protection to 20,000 people last year, one of the highest figures in Europe, and we welcomed 3,000 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, the highest number of any country in Europe. Our legal migration methods are entirely fair. We therefore should be policing with complete effectiveness illegal migration routes, and the Home Secretary and I are determined to do that.
Charles Wortley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his earlier answer. But we know that the migrants, as they cross the channel, are sometimes threatening the French Navy that they will throw themselves or their children into the sea. This is an appalling act, and we need to get the French Navy to step up to the plate and actually take these people off the boats in international waters. What are we doing now to make sure this happens?
Well, discussions are underway between the UK government and the French government. Indeed, I'm speaking to my opposite number, the French Deputy Interior Minister, Monsieur Nunez, on Thursday of this week. But there is more we're doing as well, including working with the French OCRIES, the French gendarmes, the PAF, the Police aux Frontières, to make sure that as many of these embarkations are stopped before they even get onto the water. About 50% are stopped already before they even get onto the water. We would like that number to be a great deal higher.
We now come to Olivia Blake.
Question 19, Mr. Speaker.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to group this question with 20. The Home Office is committed to rooting out hate crime across our society, and we are in continued conversations and discussions with the police and partners across government to ensure that these criminals face justice. The government has a zero-tolerant approach to the vicious misinformation that seeks to blame any race or religion for the spread of all sorts of coronavirus rumours and misinformation, deliberately spreading false information in order to undermine our respect and tolerance for each other has been disgraceful, and obviously we are working across government to stamp this out.
Last month in South Yorkshire, there was a tripling in hate crime, and even more shockingly, a doubling in the amount directed at East or South Asian descent. Muslim communities have also been attacked and singled out over Ramadan and Eid. What engagement has she had, Mr. Speaker, with those communities at risk?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, the figures that she has quoted are simply shocking, disgraceful and unacceptable. And it speaks to individuals, a small minority, and their lack of tolerance and respect for the communities that she refers to. She has specifically asked me the engagement that I have had, but of course across government we are engaging in the Home Office as well, with different groups, different leaders of organisations at a ministerial level, but also at an individual level as well. And what I would say to the Honourable Lady and to all colleagues here, we absolutely condemn the appalling racial discrimination, hateful way in which misinformation has been spread, but also the way in which this has been targeted against specific communities.
Question 20, Mr. Speaker. Oh, just question, okay. As we're all aware, there has been a disproportionate number of deaths of Black people as a result of the coronavirus, with a number of equality organisations raising concerns about closed online groups mobilising to incite hatred and violence against communities who are becoming COVID-19 scapegoats. Stop Hate UK claim the real number of hate crimes is likely to be much higher, as incidents against people and places of worship are significantly underreported. And can the Minister confirm what specific plans have been put in place to proactively address the feared increase in hate crime?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her very, very important question and the points that she has made. Any form of hate crime is, of course, completely unacceptable, and we expect the perpetrators of such crimes to be brought to justice. And I would suggest and ask anybody who is a victim to ensure that they do engage with the police and have crimes reported. In terms of the government's response and working across government, obviously the Home Office and MHCLG continue to work carefully with the National Police Chief Council, importantly to ensure that all police forces are providing the assistance, and we police by consent in this country, but providing the assistance to communities, community organisations, having the right kind of dialogue and support, but also encouraging that hate crime throughout this pandemic, there are no excuses, are reported. And I myself and across police and across government, we continue to work with civil society partners. That is absolutely the right thing to do, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State has mentioned, there has been a sharp increase in online hate crime during the coronavirus lockdown. Organisations providing advice and support for victims are predicting a big surge in hate crime following the relaxation of lockdown measures. So can the Secretary of State tell me what steps the government is taking to introduce counter-messaging for religious, ethnic and LGBT+ groups who fear an escalation in hate attacks, and what additional funding will be given to those organisations responding to increased demand for advice and support?
No, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and he's right to ask about the cross-government work that we do and support for organisations, both within the Home Office but with MHCLG as well. It's clear particularly we see a lot of this activity take place online. We are absolutely making sure that we can tackle that. We do have robust legislation in place to deal with cyber attacks, internet trolls, harassments and perpetrators of grossly offensive and menacing obscene behaviour. We will continue to do that. But of course, through other means, places of worship and other activities across government, and we will absolutely continue to make sure that they are resourced in the right way, but importantly that we continue that community engagement and dialogue.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I've been making an assessment of this matter in recent weeks, and following publication of the most recent ONS data, I can announce to the House today that with effect from the 15th of June, the asylum support rate will be increased from £37.75 a week by 5% up to £39.60 a week. That is about 5 times higher than the prevailing rate of inflation, which is currently 0.8%.
From West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's rather an ungenerous increase, I have to say, given that it can be as low as £37 a day for certain people seeking asylum. However, any increase is something which I welcome. And could he tell me whether he could live on under £40 a day?
Well, it's per week. The rate is £39.60 per week. And it's calculated by methodology which is approved by the courts, and it is done with reference to ONS data based on the incomes of people in the bottom 10% of the population. So it's done with reference to figures by a court-approved method, and that is the right way to fix this thing. And I say again, a 5% increase is very substantially higher than inflation.
Butler. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 23.
Mr. Speaker, by your grace, I'd like to group this question with question 24, please. The government is, of course, committed to delivering an extra 20,000 police officers over the next 3 years and putting violent criminals behind bars for longer. That is why we are giving the police literally wheelbarrows full of cash, £700 million this year to help with the recruitment of 6,000 additional officers by the end of March 2021. 3,005 of these extra officers have already been recruited.
Butler.
I thank the Minister for his answer. May I first congratulate and ask him to join me in so doing all of Aylesbury's police for ensuring that the Black Lives Matter march in the town on Saturday passed off peacefully, thanks also due to the cooperation of the organisers and the community partners. Having recently been on a socially distanced patrol with the police superintendent in Aylesbury, I know the increase in officer numbers and the cash that he referred to will be very much appreciated. Can my honourable friend assure me that the process of additional recruitment will be sustained despite the undoubted pressures on the public purse due to coronavirus?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share the honourable gentleman's congratulations to his police force for the peaceful passing off of the protests in his area on Saturday. And can I thank him for, in his first few months as a member in this House, taking the trouble to spend some time with his local police. It's always informative, and I would urge all members to do the same. Of all the promises that were made at the general election, I know that delivering Brexit and delivering 20,000 police officers are the two closest to the Prime Minister's heart. And with confidence, I can therefore say we will complete that task in the time allotted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take the opportunity to place on record my thanks to Jo Farrell, the Chief Constable of Durham and Darlington Police Force, for the calm and controlled way that her force, and in particular, her excellent weekly virtual briefings that she's done across party to make sure that the MPs and council leaders are up to speed. In recent calls, one point of concern has been the frustrations that arise from the delays in restarting court proceedings. Can I ask the Minister to further encourage the Minister of Justice to do everything possible to find a safe way to get as much progress as possible on reopening the courts so that all of our police forces result in criminals being dealt with?